Welcome to Shalom Ministries. It's High Priestess Hay coming to you with the Bible story of Abram and Sarai, aka Abraham and Sarah. Let's dive into it. So God calls Abram. Abram lived in Ur, a wealthy and pagan land. God appeared to him and said, "Go to the land and I will show you. I will bless you and I will make your name great." That's in Genesis 12, 1-2. Abraham obeyed God without even knowing where he was going. And Sarah, his wife, went with him. And this begins their journey of faith. Now, Sarah was barren, meaning she couldn't have kids. For many years, she could not. And in that culture, being childless was like shameful and painful, and it felt like a burden. And it felt like an abomination, okay? But God had a plan. God promised Abraham that he would have a son. And from that son would come a great nation. God promised a miracle. So Abraham was 75 years old when God promised him a son. Could you imagine being 75 years old and God being like, "Hey, you're about to have a baby." Right? And Sarah was like 65, okay? And years passed, but still Sarah had not had a child. But then God said again, "Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son soon." In Genesis 17 and 19. Sarah laughed because it sounded impossible. She was almost 90 years old. Could you imagine being almost 90 years old and having a baby? But God said, "Anything isn't too hard for the Lord," in Genesis 18 and 14. Now Hagar and Ishmael, Sarah became discouraged. So she suggested that Abraham have a child with her servant, which was Hagar. And Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. But Ishmael was not the promised child. God intended for Sarah to give birth herself. So God renames Abram and Sarai. Abram became Abraham, which is father of many nations. And Sarai became Sarah, which was princess, noblewoman, who began to be mother of the nations. This showed that destiny was being fulfilled. Now, at 90 years old, Sarah became pregnant. Adam was 100. They had a 10-year gap. So she gave birth to Isaac, whose name means laughter. Sarah said, "God has made me laugh, and to all who hear will laugh with me," in Genesis 21 and 6. God protects the covenant, and conflicts arose between Sarah and Hagar. God told Abram, "In Isaac shall your seed be called," Genesis 21 and 12. This means Isaac is the son of the covenant, the chosen bloodline. But Ishmael also got blessed because he also belonged to the same, right? But promise belonged to Isaac, okay? Like I said, even though they both got blessed. Now, Abraham's test was as follows. Genesis 22. He asked him to sacrifice Isaac. The very promise he waited decades for, right? Which was to have a child. He was asked to sacrifice. Abram obeyed, showing complete faith. Right before sacrifice, God stopped him. Amen. And gave him a ram and was like, "Here, sacrifice this and not your son," which reaffirmed the blessings. Now, Sarah lived to be about 127 years old. The only woman in the Bible whose age at death is actually recorded. Now, Abram purchased a tomb in the cave of Machpelah to bury her. This same place became a burial site of Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. It is the burial place of the patriots of Israel. Abraham's final years Abraham lived to be 175 years old, which was 50 years more than his wife. He was wealthy, honored, protected, and fulfilled. God's covenant continued through Isaac and Jacob and the 12 tribes of Israel, King David, and eventually the story of Jesus in the Bible came along. But that being said, you guys, I hope that this story has been interesting to you guys and insightful. Stay blessed, never stress, with much peace, much power, much love, much light, and of course, much joy. See you next time.